There are nights that change lives, nights that rewrite destinies, and then there are nights that should have ended after one tragedy, but instead triggered something far darker. This is the story of a helicopter crash that should have been a freak accident, an unexpected mechanical failure in the dead of night. But when investigators reached the crash site, they discovered something that didn't belong. Something that turned a routine accident report into a chilling murder investigation. And the truth they eventually uncovered would leave even seasoned detectives questioning everything they thought they knew about fear, betrayal, and the lengths some people will go to hide the truth. The crash that shouldn't have happened. Late that night, the sky above the remote valley was unusually silent. The kind of stillness where even the wind seems to hold its breath. A private helicopter lifted off from a secluded estate, carrying 2 passengers and a pilot who had flown that route hundreds of times. Nothing about the flight plan was risky. The weather was calm. The machine had passed inspection days earlier. To this day, investigators say it should have been one of the safest flights imaginable. But minutes after takeoff, something went horribly wrong. Witnesses miles away reported seeing a flicker of fire in the sky, brief, almost hesitant, followed by a thunderous boom that shook windows and scattered birds into the air. When emergency services arrived, they expected twisted metal, fire damage, and maybe survivors clinging to life. What they found instead was wreckage that looked wrong. The helicopter's body was split cleanly in ways no mechanical failure could explain. Pieces of the fuselage were scattered far too evenly, as if placed there. And the biggest question came from what wasn't there: the bodies. There should have been 3. Instead, there was only one. The body that broke the case open. The body belonged to the pilot. His injuries were consistent with a crash: impact trauma, burns, and shattered bones. But the other 2 passengers, both adults, were nowhere to be found. At first, rescuers thought they might have stumbled away, injured, confused, maybe seeking help. But search teams combed the valley for hours, then days, using dogs, drones, and thermal technology. Nothing. Not a footprint. Not a torn piece of clothing. Not even blood. It was as if they vanished into thin air. And then came the detail that changed everything. The helicopter door had been forced open from the inside before impact. The metal was bent outward, not inward. Someone had tried to escape. But how? The helicopter was thousands of feet in the air when the mechanical failure supposedly happened. Why would someone risk opening a door mid-flight, unless they were more afraid of someone on board than the fall itself? That question propelled investigators into the darkest theories: kidnapping, torture, staged deaths, forced disappearances. But the truth was even more disturbing. The missing passengers had not been alive at the moment of impact. The pilot had been flying alone, which meant someone had planted the bodies, or removed them. A secret meeting and a deadly motive. As detectives dug deeper, they uncovered a web of secrets surrounding the passengers. They were business partners, tied to a company that appeared successful on paper, but was crumbling beneath hidden debts and fraudulent deals. One partner had recently hinted at exposing everything: bank records, shell companies, offshore accounts. Millions were at stake. And the other partner? He stood to lose everything: his fortune, his reputation, his freedom. But here's where the story twisted further. That night, the 2 partners met at the estate for what was pitched as a last-minute negotiation. A final chance to settle things quietly. But one of them never planned for that helicopter to reach its destination. Investigators discovered a trail of messages, deleted but recovered, revealing a series of threats. Words like, "We settle tonight," "No more games," and "You won't make it out of this." The crash wasn't the tragedy. The crash was the cover-up. Someone wanted the world to believe the partner who threatened to expose the truth died in a tragic accident. But when the crash went sideways, when the bodies weren't positioned as intended, the killer had to improvise. What should have been a simple staged accident had spiraled into a desperate scramble to hide 2 deaths before the authorities realized what had really happened. The evidence no one could ignore. For days, forensic teams sifted through the wreckage. Burnt fragments, melted wires, scorched earth. Nothing seemed helpful. But then a technician found something almost overlooked: a piece of fabric fused into the metal near the rear rotor. It wasn't from the pilot's uniform, and it wasn't from the passenger seats. It matched a shirt worn by one of the missing partners earlier that evening. But the burn pattern told a horrifying story. The fire damage on the cloth happened before the helicopter burst into flames. Someone set him on fire. The autopsy, once the body was eventually found miles away in a shallow ditch, revealed something even worse. He was killed hours before the helicopter even took off. The second body was located soon after, buried hastily, with signs of blunt force trauma. The killer had tried to stage the helicopter crash as the cause of death, but the timing didn't match. What authorities pieced together was stunning. The victims were murdered first, their bodies loaded onto the helicopter, and the pilot was forced to fly the craft into the air. But something went wrong. Either he resisted, or the helicopter malfunctioned prematurely. The killer triggered the crash too early, leaving the pilot to die alone, and the bodies jettisoned in panic as the plan unraveled. Every small mistake created a breadcrumb trail that ultimately exposed the entire plot. The stranger in the shadows. As the case neared its conclusion, investigators thought they had uncovered every piece of the puzzle. But then came a detail that reopened questions no one wanted to ask. In a rural gas station 10 miles from the crash site, security footage revealed something unsettling. A figure in a dark jacket standing beside a pickup truck at 3:27 a.m., just hours after the helicopter went down. He wasn't buying anything, wasn't talking to anyone, he was simply watching the road, as if waiting for someone. When the killer's car appeared on camera minutes later, speeding past without stopping, the stranger turned his head slowly, tracking it until the taillights faded into the distance. Then he got into his truck and followed. Investigators couldn't identify him. No plates, no fingerprints, no trace of the man ever being in the area before or after. Some believed he was an accomplice. Others thought he was a hired lookout brought in to ensure the helicopter launched without interference. But the biggest fear came from a different theory entirely, that he wasn't working with the killer, he was watching the killer. A handler, a supervisor, someone making sure the job was done cleanly and quietly. If this man was part of the plan, he vanished into the night without leaving a single clue behind. And if he wasn't part of the plan, then someone else, someone powerful, someone still free knew exactly what happened that night and allowed the killer to take the fall alone. That unanswered question still lingers in the minds of the detectives who worked the case. Was the killer truly the mastermind, or just a pawn in a plot much bigger, darker, and more calculated than anyone ever imagined? The night everything unraveled. In the end, it wasn't the helicopter crash that caught the killer, it was the panic, the rushed movements, the sloppy burial, the late-night calls trying to bluff through alibis. When investigators reviewed the security footage from the estate, they noticed something chilling. The killer returning hours after the crash, pacing, sweating, getting in and out of his car repeatedly, as if debating whether to flee or clean up evidence. Technology filled in the gaps: phone locations, car GPS logs, digital timestamps. The killer's story collapsed under its own weight. He confessed eventually, but the confession raised a question that still haunts investigators. Did he really act alone? Some believe there was help, someone who planned the sabotage, someone who moved the bodies, someone who knew how to trigger a mid-air failure. But that second person vanished from the narrative, never identified, never found. What remains is a night that should have ended in a simple mechanical tragedy, but instead revealed a calculated murder plot dripping with greed, fear, and betrayal. The helicopter was just the stage. The real story was what happened before the blades ever started spinning. And that is the terrifying truth about the night a helicopter crash turned into a murder trap. A night where a desperate man tried to bury his crimes under twisted metal and burning fuel, but couldn't outrun the evidence he left behind. It proves a brutal reality. Even the most elaborate plans collapse under pressure, and even the darkest secrets eventually claw their way to the surface. If you want more stories that dive into the shadow, stories that expose the hidden truths behind tragedies, mysteries, and crimes, make sure you follow along so you never miss what comes next. Because sometimes the most frightening stories are the ones that begin with an accident and end with a revelation no one saw coming.